Some big entertainment industry news breaking just this morning. Netflix has won a bidding war to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery.
In December 2025, Netflix signed a contract to buy Warner Brothers Discovery for $82.7 billion. And Hollywood didn't die with a bang or a protest or even a fight. It died with a signature on a piece of paper. And this wasn't just another corporate merger, where one company buys another company and everything keeps running the same way it always did. This was the final move in a decade-long heist that systematically dismantled everything that made Hollywood work and replaced it with something that looks like entertainment but functions more like a utility company. And the crazy part is that Netflix pulled off this heist using two very simple strategies that analysts call the mechanisms of disruption, but that people in Hollywood started calling by much darker names: the kidnapping and the killing. And by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop it. Golden handcuffs. For decades, Hollywood operated on a risk and reward system where actors and directors took lower fees up front in exchange for something called back-end points. And this meant that if you were someone like Tom Cruise and you made a Mission Impossible movie that earned $1 billion at the box office, you got a piece of that $1 billion and you became incredibly wealthy because you were a partner in the film's success. And this system worked because it aligned everyone's interests, and it meant that the stars had skin in the game, and they would promote the movie and fight for it to succeed because their payday depended on it. But Netflix looked at this system and decided to completely destroy it. They introduced something called the cost-plus model, where Netflix pays the production cost plus a premium that's usually around 130 to 150%. And then they buy out every future right, and every residual, and every single cent of potential profit. And this creates what people started calling golden handcuffs, because the talent gets paid regardless of whether the content succeeds or fails. And they get paid a massive amount up front. But it does something really insidious because it removes that person from the open market and traps them inside Netflix's walled garden, where their value is determined by internal metrics that Netflix refuses to share with anyone. The first major hostage was Shonda Rhimes. In 2017, she was the queen of network television, with shows like Grey's Anatomy and Scandal dominating ABC's primetime lineup and generating billions in advertising revenue. And when she left ABC for Netflix with an initial deal worth $150 million, the entire industry was shocked because no one had ever paid that much for a TV producer before. But by 2021, that deal had escalated to nearly $450 million because Netflix wasn't just buying her shows. They were buying her entire creative output and building a lifestyle brand around her work with things like the Queen's Ball, live events, and VR experiences. They didn't want Bridgerton the show. They wanted the entire life cycle of Shonda Rhimes' imagination, and they were willing to pay whatever it took to own it completely. Then came Ryan Murphy. Netflix paid him $300 million, and they did it right as Disney was moving in to acquire Fox, where Murphy had his deal. And this was a calculated power play because Murphy was the creator behind Glee and American Horror Story and Pose, and Netflix saw an opportunity to kidnap him at the exact moment when his old home was being demolished. And for years, Murphy's Netflix output was critically panned with shows that got terrible reviews and seemed like failures. But the algorithm didn't care about reviews. It cared about engagement. And when Dharma and The Watcher generated over 1 billion viewing hours combined in 2022, The Kidnapping was validated because Murphy wasn't a rock star creator anymore, making art that critics celebrated. He was a high-functioning component of what people started calling the content hose. But if Rhimes and Murphy provided the prestige, Adam Sandler provided the comfort food. In 2014, Sandler's theatrical power was fading, and his movies were bombing at the box office, and studios didn't want to work with him anymore. But Netflix saw data that no one else had access to, and that data showed that people rewatched Adam Sandler movies at absolutely staggering rates. So they signed him for $250 million, and then they extended that deal for another $275 million. And by 2025, Adam Sandler had become the highest-paid actor in the world, and he was earning more than Tom Cruise, despite the fact that he hadn't had a theatrical hit in over 6 years. He had effectively vanished from the cultural conversation about cinema while becoming the permanent background noise of millions of American living rooms. And this is what complete isolation looks like, because Sandler exists in what people call the Sandlerverse, where he makes movies that no one talks about but everyone watches, and Netflix owns every frame of it. The most aggressive move was Knives Out. Netflix paid $469 million for 2 sequels to a mystery movie, and that breaks down to about $235 million per film for a whodunit. And to put that in perspective, the first Knives Out movie only cost $40 million to make, and it was a massive success. So why would Netflix pay almost 6 times the original budget just for the sequels? Because it was a signal to every A-list director and actor in Hollywood that said we can pay you more than a box office success ever could. It bought director Rian Johnson and star Daniel Craig completely out of the theatrical system. Glass Onion was given a token 1-week theatrical release just to qualify for awards, but its true purpose was to serve as a customer acquisition tool and a digital asset, not a movie. And this is when Hollywood realized that Netflix wasn't competing with them. Netflix was systematically removing every major piece from the board. Death of the theater. In April 2025, Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos stood at the Time 100 Summit and delivered what sounded like a eulogy for an old friend. He called the theatrical window outdated and argued that Netflix wasn't destroying Hollywood, but saving it by giving consumers what they wanted, which was the ability to watch a blockbuster on their couch on day one without having to drive to a theater and pay for tickets and parking and overpriced popcorn. And he positioned Netflix as a consumer-focused company that cared about delivering programming in the way people wanted to watch it without letting outside forces get in the way. But what saving looked like was actually an execution. 8 months later, in December 2025, Netflix announced the Warner Brothers acquisition, and the stock market immediately understood what was happening. Cinemark and AMC and IMAX all saw their shares plummet because Warner Brothers had been releasing about 20 movies per year into theaters, and those releases kept the entire theatrical ecosystem alive. But analysts predicted that under Netflix ownership, that number would drop to 0 for mid-budget films and maybe 1 or 2 event releases for the biggest franchises. And this wasn't speculation. Netflix had already proven their model with their own original films, where they gave movies token theatrical releases that lasted maybe a week just to satisfy directors who had it written into their contracts. But the real release was always on the platform where Netflix controlled everything. Christopher Nolan called it straight-to-video. Martin Scorsese argued that algorithms treat viewers as consumers rather than audiences, and that there's a fundamental difference between those two things. He said that cinema is supposed to be a shared experience in a dark room with strangers where you collectively experience a story and it becomes part of the cultural fabric. But Netflix treats movies like widgets in a content library where The Irishman sits next to a reality show about people decorating cakes, and the algorithm sees no difference between them. And the paradox that Scorsese understood better than anyone is that he made The Irishman for Netflix because they were the only company left with a checkbook big enough to fund a 3.5-hour prestige drama about the mob. The Kidnapping works on everyone, even the people who understand exactly what's happening. The Warner Brothers deal wasn't about buying everything. Netflix forced a spin-off of all the dying cable assets like CNN and Discovery Channel because they didn't want the past. What they wanted was the IP engine. They wanted DC Comics and Harry Potter and Game of Thrones and the entire Warner Brothers film library going back a century. And this is where the strategy shifts from content aggregator to content monopoly. Because Netflix doesn't view Batman as a movie character, they view Batman as data fuel. Every time someone watches a Batman movie, the algorithm learns more about what makes people stay subscribed, and what makes them cancel, and how to optimize the content pipeline. Owning Warner Brothers means Netflix now controls the entire life cycle of the most valuable stories in pop culture history, and they can feed those stories into their learning system and use them to predict human behavior at a scale that no entertainment company has ever achieved before. The monopoly. Traditional Hollywood studios made decisions based on gut instinct, where a producer reads a script and likes it and takes a gamble on whether audiences will respond. But Netflix doesn't operate that way. They use something called taste clusters, where they don't see you as a 30-year-old male or a retired teacher or a college student. They see you as a member of Cluster 452, which might be defined as someone who likes gritty female-led action with a hint of period romance, and everything is A/B tested down to the pixel. The thumbnail you see for a movie is completely different from the thumbnail your neighbor sees, because if you respond to romantic imagery, Netflix shows you the two leads kissing. But if you respond to action, they show you an explosion. And this is incredibly effective at getting clicks, but it also creates a fundamental disconnect between the marketing and the actual art, because you and your neighbor might watch the same movie, but you were sold completely different products. This data-driven culture isn't just for audiences, it's for employees too. Netflix pays software engineers $450,000 per year, which creates golden handcuffs for the technical side of the operation. And directors aren't just creators anymore. They're feeders of the algorithm, where their job is to produce content that hits specific engagement metrics that Netflix has identified as preventing subscriber churn. And this is why Netflix originals all start to feel the same after a while, because they're all optimized for the same behavioral outcomes. And the really disturbing part is that Netflix measures success in ways that have nothing to do with artistic merit or cultural impact. They measure completion rates and rewatch rates and the percentage of viewers who start another episode within 30 seconds of the credits rolling. And this creates an incentive system where directors learn to manufacture cliffhangers and manipulate pacing, not because it serves the story, but because it serves the retention metrics. The algorithm rewards addiction mechanics over narrative quality, and everyone working inside the system knows it, but they can't escape it because Netflix is the only company still writing checks big enough to fund prestige content. The Warner Brothers acquisition isn't just a corporate merger, it's a labor catastrophe. When one company becomes the only major buyer in town, economists call that a monopsony, and it means that workers lose all negotiating leverage. For the middle class of Hollywood, which includes supporting actors and staff writers and crew members, the Netflix model is devastating because they've lost access to residuals. In the old system, when a show went into syndication on cable, or when it got licensed to international markets, everyone who worked on that show got paid again and again for years. Those residual checks were how middle-class Hollywood sustained itself between jobs. But Netflix doesn't do residuals. They buy everything outright with the cost-plus model, and once you get paid your fee, you never see another dollar no matter how successful the show becomes. And this is creating a wealth concentration problem, where the Shonda Rhimeses and Ryan Murphys are making hundreds of millions, while the working-class crews and supporting cast are being squeezed out of the industry entirely. A staff writer on a network show in 2010 could build a career on residuals that paid their mortgage for decades. That same writer on a Netflix show in 2025 gets paid once and then has to scramble for the next gig with no safety net. And because Netflix operates in total secrecy about viewership numbers, writers can't even use the success of their shows as leverage in negotiations. You could write the most watched series in Netflix history, and you'd have no proof of it because Netflix refuses to release real viewership data. This information asymmetry is a weapon that Netflix uses to keep wages down while they pay astronomical sums to a tiny elite at the top. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have called the Warner Brothers deal an anti-monopoly nightmare, because when Netflix becomes the only place to sell a show, and Netflix only buys what the algorithm says will generate engagement, What happens to the stories that the algorithm hasn't seen before? What happens to weird experimental films or shows about subjects that don't fit neatly into a taste cluster? They don't get made. And this is how you kill an entire art form without ever admitting that's what you're doing. You just change the incentive structure until only one type of content survives. As we stand in late 2025 looking at the remains of the old studio system, we have to ask what we actually lost in this heist. We got a steady stream of content that never stops. We got massive paydays for elite creators like Shonda Rhimes and Ryan Murphy. We got the convenience of watching movies on our couch without putting on pants. But we lost the shared cultural event. We lost the experience of sitting in a dark theater with strangers and collectively reacting to something we've never seen before. We lost the idea that a movie could be an event that the entire country talks about for weeks. Hollywood hasn't been killed in the traditional sense. It's been reformatted. It's no longer an art form to be experienced. It's a utility to be consumed like water or electricity, where you turn on the tap and content flows out, and Netflix is now the sole provider. The heist is complete. The vault is empty, and most of us are still sitting on our couches, scrolling through the Netflix interface, trying to decide what to watch next. So, do you think Netflix saved Hollywood or destroyed it? Let me know in the comments. And if this made you think differently about your Netflix subscription, hit that like button and share this with someone who still thinks streaming is just about convenience. Thanks for watching.